Okay, so we're going to go over the anatomy of the Constitution reading here. Anatomy of the Constitution. How do they govern? The United States Constitution is the document that creates our nation's government. The contents of the Constitution create the three branches of our government and give directions for how the federal government works. It does this with a little over 4,500 words, covering only 4 sheets of paper. Although the Constitution was written over 220 years ago, it still guides our officials in running our country today. It is also the oldest written constitution still in use today. Introducing the Preamble. Our Constitution is divided into 9 parts. The first paragraph is called the Preamble. Its job is to introduce the Constitution, explain what the Constitution is meant to do, and describe the purpose of the new government. Creating Congress. Article 1. Article 1 is the first and longest part of the Constitution. It creates the legislative branch of our government. Legislative means lawmaking. This section is the longest because the people who wrote the Constitution believed that a legislative branch is very important in a government that represents the citizens. Members of the legislature, or lawmaking body, are responsible for turning citizens' wants and needs into laws. Represent me. The legislative branch makes our government a representative democracy. In a representative democracy, citizens elect people to represent their needs and concerns in government. Article 1 creates a legislature called Congress and divides it in 2 parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Article 1 describes how Congress should be organized, tells what qualifications legislatures need to have, and says how often Congress should hold elections and meet as a group. It also describes other details of operation that each House of Congress gets to decide for itself. You can take a look at the Senate and House requirements right here. I'm going to move forward for now. The powers of Congress. Article 1 lists the powers Congress has. Even though Congress is not a lawmaking body, it is not allowed to make laws about anything that's not on the list. Collect taxes, borrow money and pay debts, make rules for how to become a citizen, regulate commerce or trade with other nations, between nations and with Indian tribes, coin money and punish counterfeiters, establish post offices, give patents to new inventions, create the lower federal courts, punish pirates, declare war, and support an army and navy, make any other laws that are necessary and proper to carry out the powers on the list. Creating the President, Article 2. Article 2 of the Constitution describes the job of the executive branch. This branch executes or carries out the laws. The President heads this branch, which also includes the Vice President and many departments in charge of carrying out the government's day-to-day business. Article 2 describes who qualifies to be president, what powers the office has, and what happens if a president misbehaves. It also explains the Electoral College, which is the process of how the president is selected. Presidential powers. The overall job of the executive branch is to carry out or enforce laws. But Article 2 gives the president a list of specific duties. To act as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, to maintain a cabinet of advisors who run the 15 executive departments, like the State Department and the Treasury, to grant pardons in all federal criminal offenses and reprieves, postpone punishments like an execution, to negotiate treaties with other countries, to appoint ambassadors, Supreme Court justices, and federal court justices or cabinet members, to make a State of the Union address to Congress, to represent the United States when dealing with foreign countries, and to make sure that laws are carried out or executed. Creating the courts, Article 3. Here come the judges. Article 3 makes the judicial branch. The judicial branch interprets laws to decide what they mean and whether they have been followed in specific cases. Article 3 creates the Supreme Court and authorizes Congress to create federal courts below the Supreme Court. These courts deal with the United States laws, not state laws. Article 3 also gives directions about what kinds of cases the Supreme Court and federal courts can hear. Under Article 3, federal judges are appointed, not elected. They stay on the bench until they retire, die, or are removed for bad behavior. Article 3 also guarantees that trial by jury for criminal cases and explains the crime of treason. The states, Article 4. States have the power to create and enforce their own laws. Article 4 of the Constitution describes how the states should interact with each other. Each state has to respect the law and court decisions of the other states. If a criminal flees from one state to another, the state where the crime was committed can request the criminal be returned to face charges. This is called extradition. New states can be admitted to the Union with the authorization of Congress and the President, and all states need to have a Republican or representative type of government. This basically just means that states can't have kings. Amending the Constitution. Article 5. The Constitution is not set in stone. Article 5 describes what must be done to amend or change the Constitution. You will read more about this on the next page. Article 6. Supreme Law of the Land. Federalism is the idea that the national government shares power from the state governments. But what happens if a state law disagrees with a national or federal law? Article 6 states that the laws and treaties of the United States government are the supreme law of the land. If a state law disagrees with a federal law wins. This article also requires officials working in the state and federal governments to take an oath to support the Constitution, no matter what. Ratification, Article 7. Article 7 says that the Constitution could not take effect until at least 9 out of the 13 states approved it. Back then, there were only 13. Each state had its own convention to discuss and vote on the Constitution's plan for government. But getting approval wasn't easy. Some people thought that the 7 articles weren't enough. After much debate, it was agreed that 10 amendments needed to be added to the Constitution. These amendments, called the Bill of Rights, would list specific rights not already mentioned in the Constitution. This put people's minds at ease, and the Constitution became the law of the land on March 1789. The Bill of Rights came in 1791. Amending the Constitution. Article 5 describes how an amendment is added to the Constitution. There are only 2 steps necessary. First, the amendment needs to be proposed or introduced. Then it needs to be ratified or passed. Sounds easy? Well, it's not. Hundreds of amendment proposals are introduced in Congress every year. Only 33 have ever received enough votes to actually be proposed. Of those, 27 have been amendments to the Constitution. The process to add an amendment can take years. There are 4 different ways an amendment can be added to the Constitution. But in all cases, an amendment has to be approved at the national and the state level. Here are the steps in the amendment process. Step 1 is to propose. Either Congress or the states can propose an amendment to the Constitution. Both houses of Congress need to propose the amendment with a 2/3 vote. This is how all current amendments have been offered. The other option is to have 2/3 of the state legislature call on Congress to hold a constitutional convention. So far, no amendments have come this way. Step 2 is to ratify. Regardless of how the amendment is proposed, it needs to be ratified by the states. 3/4 of the state legislatures must approve of the amendment proposed by Congress. The alternative is to have 3/4 of the states approve the amendment by holding conventions to vote on it. The state convention method was only used once, to approve the 21st Amendment repealing prohibition in 1933. You can take a look at the diagram here to review the process to add an amendment as well. Going back to our assignment for today, you'll need to complete the Whose Job Is It worksheet. And if we take a look at the Whose Job Is It worksheet, you'll see that there are several things you need to do here. You are telling me which branch has the power here. So just write the correct letter in the blank. You may print it off and do it that way, or simply write the correct letter in the online text box. Don't worry about the word tent there. That was for an activity if this was done in a brick and mortar school. So once you've completed this reading as well as submitted this activity, you're done for the day. Great job. Should you need my help, don't hesitate to let me know.